Hello friends, welcome to the Remittance. Today we will be discussing editorial from the Hindu newspaper of 10th of December 2022. So let's start with the editorial. It is related with India's G20 presidency and United Nations Security Council. You can relate it with your General Studies paper 2 syllabus, the international relations, international organization and their mandate. And the second topic that you can link this article with is the effect of policies of developed countries on India's interests. And of course the regional groupings and etc. etc. Now we know that in December 2022 India assumed G20 presidency after the G20 summit in Indonesia. This is the logo of India's G20 presidency and the G20 summit that India is going to host in the year 2023. And this is the motto that India has taken, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one earth, one family and one future. Now the article is about the G20 and how it can be the alternative of the United Nations Security Council. Now recently there are two contexts, like in story so far we would discuss two contexts. The first one is the assumption of G20 presidency by India, the assumption of G20 presidency by India. And the second one is about the Russia-Ukraine war and how the G20 presidency of India is linked with it, and it is important in this context. We know that Russian invasion has been condemned by the Western countries. However, India had according to the experts quite a neutral stance. India did condemn the war, but did not particularly condemn Russia because we with Russia share good relationships. So India begins the presidency of the G20 and there is a certain reluctance on its part when it comes to condemning the Russia directly for its invasion of Ukraine. However, India has gone out of its way that Ukraine will not be the centerpiece of the G20 summit this year. And this position is because of the fear of failure, especially because of the position that India had taken not to condemn Russia directly. However, the war did condemn Russia, and was said that it is the Russia and Ukraine who are going to bilaterally settle the issue between the two countries. And it is not because that Russia invasion is the most urgent issue for the world to resolve, but after the G20 summit in Bali, Indonesia, there is a greater understanding of India's position, which is as articulated by the United States President Joe Biden himself. If we consider the Bali Declaration, which was virtually drafted by India, the New Delhi has recognized the potential honest. It is recognized as a potential honest broker, who may be able to end the devastating war. So we know that G20's presidency is alphabetical in order, and it has brought India to the right place at the right time, especially when the world is looking for an alternative to the United Nations Security Council. If we speak of the United Nations Security Council, then there are 5 permanent members and there are 10 non-permanent members which are elected basically on the basis of the votes, and there are regions which are given the non-permanent seats in the United Nations Security Council. And recently, if we also consider the month presidency of the United Nations Security Council that has been undertaken by India, then we know the United Nations Security Council, the UNSC, I would just refer it to the UNSC or the Security Council. It is basically paralyzed by veto. According to the writer, UNSC is paralyzed by veto because any of the 5 permanent members vetoes any resolution, it is not passed or it is then not entertained by the General Assembly or the United Nations Security Council. And if we speak of the most recent event during the COVID-19 pandemic, that was the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, the credibility of the Security Council is being questioned because Russia is one of the 5 permanent members of UNSC. However, there is a time has come, or in fact it's a high time that the alternative to United Nations Security Council's presidency be recognized, and according to the writer it can be G20. And with the assumption of G20 presidency by India and the way India has been trying to assert itself at the international platform, especially when it comes to its endeavor to emerge as a regional power and also in the Indo-Pacific region, then G20 presidency becomes of utmost importance. Now if we speak of the reform the United Nations Security Council, and there is one whole editorial and this complete topic we had discussed in one of the editorials. You can go to our YouTube channel and you can watch that editorial. the expansion of its permanent membership is being strongly resisted by the permanent members, and a large majority of the United Nations General Assembly does not benefit anyone except for those who aspire to be the permanent members. So the expansion is not going to benefit the General Assembly members. In fact, there is a whole lot of reforms which are needed in the United Nations Security Council, and which of course is resisted by the P5 in the United Nations Security Council. Now every candidate is a strong opponent which is waiting to pounce the moment and there is any serious proposal to make the candidate country a permanent member. So writer is talking about that in United Nations Security Council the reform is nearing to impossible, and thus we need to start looking for the alternative to UNSC. Every resolution or every proposal to make a candidate a permanent member faces a strong opposition from the other 5 members. And amongst the proposals which were made in the last 3 decades, there is none that can command the votes of the 5 permanent members as well as the 2/3 of the members of the General Assembly. So this is basically the rule which is followed in UNSC to pass a resolution: no veto from the P5 and 2/3 majority from the United Nations General Assembly. So no veto from P5 and 2/3 of the majority. Now this becomes highly impossible to pass any resolution in the UNSC. Thus the reforms is considered as though highly demanding but nearly impossible. Now, although the G20 that consists of the 19 countries and of course the European countries and European Union, it was set up by the G7 countries in the year 1999, of course after the Asian economic crisis that was faced. So G20 was established so as to ensure the economic stability in the world, and it was then upgraded to the level of the head of the states and government in the year 2008 after the subprime crisis. So in order to address the major issues that afflict the global economy, such international financial stability and climate change mitigation and sustainable development, etc., the other issues were also taken up by the G20. Its composition is such that it looks like an expanded Security Council. So there are, now if we consider G20 and if we consider the UNSC. So UNSC, there are 5 permanent members, 10 non-permanent members, on total 15 members. Every year the presidency is rotated, and a member country other than the P5 cannot serve for more than 2 years, and each year the voting is done for the election of the non-permanent or for the selection of the non-permanent countries. Now G20, if we consider, there are 19 members plus the European Union. So if we look at this structure, then it seems to be an expanded UNSC. So this is the reason why the writer says it could act as a alternative to the G20. Alright, now let's move on to the next part of the article. Now it is significant, it is representative of all the significant countries of the 21st century, and there is a balance between the developed and the developed countries. The permanent members, the declared aspirants, etc., Africa, Latin America, they have also been represented in G20. For example, Argentina is one of the members of G20. Mexico is member of G20. South Africa is member of G20. Saudi Arabia is member of G20. Japan, right, Egypt. So they are Turkey, they are all member of G20. So it looks like an expanded form of the expanded version of the Security Council. Now EU represents a very important segment of the global power structure, and the consensus decision of G20 should be universally accepted. Now if we consider the gradual transformation that G20 that has undergone from an economic body to a political body, which can be initiated on the basis of the Bali Declaration, which constitutes the consensus in the group on the Russia-Ukraine war, and if G20 emerges as a pacemaker in Europe, it will attain legitimacy as a group to promote the international peace and security. It can gradually then become the alternative to the United Nations Security Council. Now, what the writer wants to say, that if we do consider the Bali Declaration that was passed in the year 2022, Indonesia G20 summit, then the Bali Declaration. Now, India in its G20 participation in Indonesia did not directly condemn Russia. the Bali Declaration did constitute a consensus with respect to the Russia-Ukraine. And if G20 emerges as a stabilizer, and if it emerges as a organization or informal body to build consensus peace in Europe, then it can gradually be transformed as an alternative to the United Nations Security Council. Now, if we consider the most important difference will be that no one can prevent such meeting by the use of the veto. Now, if you look at the Security Council structure, then many of the resolutions can be vetoed by the permanent 5 members. However, this is not the case with the G20. So there is no veto voting, and thus the majority consensus can be based in order to pass the resolution with which is which is an important concern of a concerned nation. So the care should be taken to not to isolate any country, but rather to promote a solution which is acceptable to all. Now, Russia will have a reason out of its behavior rather than threaten the use of veto to intimidate the international community. Now, the grave danger of a permanent member waging a war and vetoing every resolution against it is a reality that the United Nations needs to address. So, generally it has been seen that P5 nation, they threaten to use veto in order to veto a particular resolution. So, basically they threaten using their veto power. Many a times if you look at the behavior of China, then it has also vetoed many of the resolution placed by India at United Nations Security Council. In fact, with related to declaration of the terrorist as well, international terrorists, China does veto all these resolutions. For example, the case of Masood, the terrorist from Pakistan. I think Masood is related with the Jaish-e-Mohammed. So this is the point, that veto is being unreasonably used to veto a resolution that is passed against a member. However, there is no veto power given to any of the country in the G20. So thus it can gradually, according to the writer, evolve as an alternative to UNSC. The first step for India taken is to highlight the Bali Declaration and present a roadmap during the preparatory process for the G20 and pursue the Sherpas. Sherpas are basically the representatives of the country in G20 to take it on its agenda. The response cannot be negative except by Russia, and it has to negotiate as an equal with the other member of the G20. So now Russia will be at an equal platform with the other member, and it will be devoid of any veto power. And it's not just about Russia, but it also about US, China, and UK, and all the permanent 5 members. If there is any resolution which is passed against their activities, they veto their resolution. So this is one case. So veto becomes the one issue that is needed to be addressed, and according to the writer, G20 can address this issue. If Russia is looking for an escape route, Russia will accept India's role as an honest broker in the process. This will enhance the India's credibility, capacity to deal with crisis in a formal way within the G20, and it will also ultimately help India to accomplish goal of securing the reform of UNSC. Now, once the basic work is done, the UNSC then can formalize the decision and implement it for the international peace and security. Now, this is what this is the procedure that writer wants to suggest, that there can be consensus that can achieve at G20 level, and which then can be formalized as a decision at the UNSC level. So this is what the writer wants to say, that decision can be taken at the G20 level, which then can be formalized at UNSC level. Alright. Now, the writer wants to say that being an honest broker is not a new role in establishing international peace and security, and it is definitely not new to India. And although it has taken strong position when we speak of the decolonization, India had a strong stance. When we speak of the NAM, that is non-alignment movement, India had a strong stance against the bipolarization of the world. So it has kept the conversation going among the protagonists, and it had also promoted a balanced outcome. India has been an author of the several landmark resolutions that have been passed by the UNSC. For example, the Palestine issue. India took the stand of two nation state. India was also the part of efforts which was made to prevent the expulsion of Egypt from the non-alignment movement at the Havana summit when Arabs turned against Egypt. The flexibility in negotiation, even while having a principled national position, has given India a credibility. And if we speak of its president as of the G20, then the goodwill that India has for the world and for the global peace, it can work as an asset at the critical movement at United Nations. The legitimization of G20 as a global arbitrator in international affairs will create multilateral instruments where all members can then be treated as equal. Though it may take a very long time for, according to the writer, for the G20 to evolve and replace the United Nations Security Council. However, the writer says it can definitely work as an instrument, an effective instrument in stopping the war and building consensus and cooperation among the member countries. Such opportunity barely arises in history, and if we do have got this opportunity, then we must sow the seeds of peace and security at the international level. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching Tarun IAS, and if you want to download the PDF of this session, you can go to the Telegram channel. The link will be given in the description below. Have a nice day.